All right, guys, moving along. This is the third installment for Buddhist doctrines and beliefs. So we're going to start off here with the three marks of existence. One you're familiar with, dukkha, pain, suffering. This is something that everyone experiences. Um, suffering is unfortunate, but this is an unfortunate but common translation of the Sanskrit word term dukkha. Um, and this kind of gives some people think that this gives the misconception of Buddhism as pessimistic. Um, in actuality, though, Buddhism is no more pessimistic than any other world religion. And maybe a better translation of dukkha might be dissatisfactoriness, frustrating, because things are always, because things are impermanent, they're always changing. They're necessarily going to produce emotional and psychological reactions from people and other beings. And so the Buddha outlined three senses in which ordinary life is actually marked by suffering. All of them are due to this idea of anicca or impermanence. First, life is marked by suffering in probably the most obvious sense, physical sense. The constant changes of our physical environment and of our own bodies inevitably result in pain and discomfort. If you go back to sacred texts, or early Buddhist texts, they are filled with passages describing giving birth, getting sick, growing old, and dying as examples of the fundamentally painful nature of human life. No one escapes from these, and so we everyone experiences this, and that's where that first noble truth comes into play. Life is full of suffering or dissatisfactoriness, frustration. Second, what we have here. Life is marked by suffering, and that happiness and enjoyment, even when they're attained, are fleeting and do not last. Once again, going back to that second mark of existence, anicca, or impermanence. We all experience happiness at various times, but inevitably it doesn't last. And then this leaves us with a sense of sadness and loss. Third, life is marked by suffering because of the very nature of human mind. Our minds naturally respond to life's pains and disappointments by giving rise to certain unwholesome and painful states. We get hatred, fear, greed, anger, and so a Buddhist would say that human existence is marked by suffering in the physical sense, in the sense of our mind, and in the whole idea of happiness, enjoyment, and enjoyment. Um, Something that's overlooked sometimes is that this suffering can apply to both the individual and it can involve the individual and society. And so something to think about is that when an individual experiences pain and dissatisfaction, it tends to produce unwholesome states of mind. Once again, hatred, greed, envy, the three poisons that individuals in turn often act upon. And so when you have an individual suffering and that suffering leads to an act, that act will probably inflict suffering on others. And then, even more so, unwholesome states of minds and the actions to which they give rise to, contribute to political and social institutions and practice that further spread suffering. This is where we get war, poverty, political repression. These are all examples of suffering on a societal level. Um, Impermanence, all right, or anicca. Um, this is probably the most basic of all the Buddhist insights, is that reality is constantly changing. From moment to moment, nothing remains stable or permanent. Our bodies, our thoughts, our feelings, all the things of the world are in an ongoing process of change. I kind of touched on this a little bit on the other day when I talked about karma. Even though you see some mental formations and ideas and stuff, they tend to become habits. That doesn't mean that they're permanent. That you can always have a change of heart. You can always embrace new ideas. You can always accept a new way of life. And so you want to think of that as, everything's in this process of change. Buddhists, think that because things are always changing, nothing we ever encounter is truly real. Because to be real is to be permanent and unchanging. And so what we normally consider to be stable things are, in fact, just casually related processes moving through time. I want to kind of put that in there because even yourself, right? What you would identify as you or I, that is also constantly changing through time. All right, and so that's where the whole idea of impermanence connects with egolessness or no self as well. And so just keep that in mind. Um, you can compare this to use like an analogy. We can compare this to viewing a movie or a motion picture. When the film runs through a projector, we perceive what appears to be images of people and things moving about and interacting with each other. But in reality, the images are just a result of light being projected through the film's various quote unquote stills that run through the projector in a rapid succession. Um, and so for Buddhists, this constant process of change is reality. If we can adjust to this state of affairs, we can live well and not suffer. The problem is that we do not see how impermanent things really are. And in a sense, we even refuse to see it. Much as those people who psychologists kind of diagnose as neurotic refuse to accept life as it actually is. Um, in truth, from a Buddhist perspective, most people have been habituated by their societies to not see impermanence. We crave something that's stable, right? Something that's fixed, something that's that gives us that sense of security. To be able to accept the idea that things are always in this constant flux of change is something that makes us is kind of unnerving. The Buddhist path, by contrast of our own, it aims at training us to see the basic and permanent nature of reality. We want to realize it fully, and we want to integrate this realization into our lives. And so, therefore, we can have this basic notion of quote unquote things. We could see this as just projected fictions, the Maya, the illusions, all right? This is a result of our diluted understanding of reality as it actually is. We want to get rid of Maya. We want to get rid of illusion. We want to recognize and get rid of it. This basic Buddhist teaching on the thoroughly impermanent nature of reality, it is hard to grasp for those not raised within a Buddhist monastic environment. The difficulty is even greater for people raised in a culture premised on the notions of permanent or lasting substances. This is typically like a Western metaphysical view that goes back to the very early stages of Greek philosophy. In truth, there is no real substance in Buddhism. Ironically, however, the Buddhist teachings of impermanence have intriguing parallels with the views of contemporary physics, in which reality ultimately is comprised of various configurations of energy. And maybe we can kind of use that idea of the Force in the film Star Wars to kind of recognize and understand the idea of Anika and Anada or Anat Men, this idea of change and of the idea of no soul or no self. If we kind of use it in the analogy or the idea of physics. The final of the three marks of existence and one of the hallmarks and the cores of Buddhist doctrine is the teaching of no self, something that we struggled with the other day. This follows directly from the ideas of impermanence and suffering. Hold on a second. Let me get my stuff right. Something that I think that might help us overcome the struggle with understanding and accepting the idea of no self is, we don't carry any, and I think we struggled the other day with carrying things into the next life. What carries over? And I was thinking, I was like, why are we struggling with this idea? Why aren't we just accepting it? Um, and I think if we want to kind of step aside from the unique nature of world religions and make a comparative for just a moment, and I'll go into some more analogies here, just think about some of the things in your faith that you might not be able to actually prove, but you just believe it and you accept it as it is. And that's if you can do that with a nada or no soul, no self, we don't need to be able to point to something, hey, concrete, this is where we see a nada being proven. We just have to accept it as a belief of Buddhism that, the only thing, if we want to say, the only thing that carries over from one life to the next is that karma. The karma that got you into the next cycle of your samsara, whatever it may be, for better or for worse. That's the only thing that carries over. Everything else, clean slate. All right, going back to the idea of a distinct new human being. The second thing that we want to look at is the whole idea of skandhas, and no self. These are forms, our senses, our perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. It changes throughout time. Who you are now is not going to be who you are 40 years from now. It wasn't who you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You've changed, and you've changed in all these five aggregates of existence. You've changed in every single skandha. All right, you've changed in physical form. You've changed in how your sense perception. You've changed in how you perceive things and what you think and your consciousness. That's undergoing all that change. So that idea of impermanence within that you're experiencing. All right, that's what kind of supports this idea of no self. Some other analogies that were used to seek that Buddhist teachers seek to convey this deeply perplexing teaching of no self. One was by the way of analogy to a chariot. The chariot exists, but when we look closely, we see that it's really just a collection of parts: wheels, axle, platform, to which we applied the label chariot, kind of like the car analogy I made. Personal identity through time here is not supplied by permanent material or metaphysical substance, but rather through casual connections, and of course the label conventionally applied to the various pieces. Similarly, the Buddha elsewhere suggests that when it comes to a human being, the body and name supplies a pragmatic unity through life. And of course, in the light of the no self teachings, Buddhists have had to redefine rebirth. Rebirth for Buddhists is not due to a reincarnated soul, but is rather a continuous moment by moment process of creation, destruction, death, and rebirth. Going back to that analogy of the candle flame, or although it may at first appear to be a substantial quote unquote thing, in reality the flame is a chemical process that changes from moment to moment. That flame can also be passed from one candle wick to another, but there is no quote unquote thing being passed. And the flame on the second wick, although in some sense connected to the first, it is not the same. The no self teaching, like other Buddhist teachings, is very much tied to meditation practices. Much Buddhist meditation involves paying careful attention to experience in order to see what is actually there. In large part, this comes down to systematically deconstruction assumptions we have concerning a self that exists apart from experience. One well-known teaching that assists such analysis involves breaking experience down to five categories. Once again, it's those skandhas or those aggregates. The skandhas, once again, material forces, raw sensations, sensory perceptions, habits, impulses, and conscious awareness. And from a Buddhist perspective, a quote-unquote person is just a collection of these five aggregates, nothing else. Moreover, the five aggregates are constantly changing mental and physical processes, so none of them can be considered a permanent self either. All right. The Buddha did, however, teach that the last aggregate, conscious awareness, has a particular importance because due to the cumulative force of karma, this conscious awareness continues for some time after death until it gives rise to a new conscious life. This means that the negative and positive qualities of consciousness follow the individual into his or her next life. Augie, I think that might answer your question about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, about how does it pick that womb. All right, karma, all right, the qualities of karma, positive and negative, all right, are following that individual and influencing his or her next life.